How's it going, guys? Welcome back to my channel. In this video we're going to be making a Mandalorian helmet from a raw 3D print. I'm going to take you through every step that I took to make this thing, including a few mistakes that I made. Obviously we're going to want to start with a 3D printed helmet. If you have a 3D printer, you can print one yourself, or you can buy 3D prints online. There's lots of people that sell just raw prints. As you can see, I printed with a 0.6mm nozzle, and this thing definitely has some bad layer lines. The first step in fixing any 3D print is to rip off all the supports. Be really careful doing this. With this particular file, it's really easy to split the plastic next to the eye holes. Once you get all the supports off, you can check out your print and make sure everything looks good. I ended up reprinting all of the earpieces with a smaller nozzle size just to make it a lot more detailed and easier for me to fix later. Then we're going to take everything outside and start just sanding the surface of the raw 3D print just to try to get some of those layer lines buffed out. However, it is worth noting that the inside of the dome I printed with no supports. There was a lot of straining towards the top, so I ended up having to clip all those out, and I used wood filler to make it feel nicer on your head inside. You can see here that there's still a ton of layer lines and a lot of work to do, even with that initial sanding. I wash the print after every time I sand it. It's now time to apply bondo, glazing, and spot putty to basically this entire thing. I like the inside of my helmets to look smooth and nice, so I bondo the inside as well. Now we're going to apply bondo all over the entire surface of the helmet. I prefer to not have to apply it all over the entire thing when I do a 3D printed part like this, but the Mando helmet needs to be perfectly smooth once we're done. Don't be too worried about getting it in the details, at least on this face, because we're going to be using a pick to dig all those back out, and the bondo glazing and spot putty is very easy to sand anyway. These are the picks that I like to use when I'm trying to dig out details like this. It'll come out really easy through that bondo. It's not very difficult at all. It makes a large mess though, so I'd recommend doing it outside, but it was dark when I shot this and I wanted to be able to see. Now we're going to sand all that bondo smooth. If you notice this area right here, you can see that the helmet cracked when I was removing the supports. So we're going to have to clean that all up. I'm going to start by sanding that area down, and then I'm going to use a soldering iron to plastic weld all of it back together. I'm going to use my soldering iron just to melt all the plastic and get it to come together nicely. I need to do the inside as well, and you might have to push kind of deep in certain areas to get it to fully sit together. This took me a couple different tries. Even after getting it fully welded, I still wasn't happy with it. I wanted it to be stronger, so I cut up a piece of plastic raft from 3D printed parts, and I glued that in, and then welded through it as well. Here's what it looks like just glued in there, and here's what it looks like welded with the glue. Make sure you use a respirator anytime you're melting glue. Here's the finished product of my welding job. After that, I sanded down the entire helmet with 120 and 320. You can see the left side sanded and the right side not yet sanded. I've been having a hard time getting the texture from the supports on the bottom to clean out nicely, so I decided to use my soldering iron on that as well. Here's what it looks like after our first sanding layer. You can see there in the middle I decided to temporarily plastic weld in another raft just to keep the cheeks from bending while I worked on it. Now I'm hitting the entire helmet with our first layer of filler primer. The 2-in-1 filler sandable is the best thing you can get, but here where I live I only have access to the normal filler primer. I probably should have taped off the ear holes, but you'll find out how that bites me in the butt later. I then took that same filler primer and doused all of the earpieces and vent. After our first layer of bondo sanding filler primer, it's looking pretty good, but if we look at the top here, still so many bad layer lines. Now this is after sanding the entire helmet with 320, and then 120 where I needed it, including picking out all of the detail lines again. Then we once again bondo areas that need it, sand that bondo, add filler primer, and sand that filler primer again. I've included this clip just to show you on the left is the 0.6mm nozzle, and it printed very fast but not as much detail, so I reprinted this part on the right with a 0.3mm nozzle, much more detail. Then we bondo all of our small parts, and bondo the helmet again. You basically need to repeat this with the entire helmet as many times as you need to get it nice and smooth. Bondo, sand, filler primer, sand. The more times you do this, the smoother you're going to be able to get that surface. Once I'm getting it close to where I like it, I up the grit to 800. Then we need to add filler primer to all of our small parts and onto our helmet again to smooth that surface back out. The small parts were looking nice, but they'd gotten so gunked up with filler primer that the edges didn't fit into the holes. The model I'm using doesn't leave any space for all those parts to fit. I would recommend printing your small parts 1% smaller than the rest of the helmet. I sanded everything and used a Dremel to make sure everything was going to fit well. With everything fitting good into the slots where they go, it was time to glue everything in. So I use a combination of E6000 and then Crazy Glue. The E6000 has an extremely strong hold but takes 24 hours. The Crazy Glue sets in like 15 seconds. Using a combination of the two allows the super glue to set and hold the piece in place while the E6000 sets over 24 hours. Now I gently use some clamps as well just to make sure it's all sitting in the right spot. Now that all the glue had set, I gave everything a light sand and then hit it all with filler primer once again, just to make sure all the gaps were good and everything like that. Now, I don't seem to have too many good clips of it, but at this point, once everything was in and good, I used 800 grit, 1000 grit, and then I wet sanded with 2000 grit and 3000 grit to make sure that my surface looked as clean and smooth as possible. Wet sanding with those higher grits really gets you a nice shine. In fact, it even slightly shines with just the gray primer on it. Here's how the helmet looked after that 3000 grit wet sand. You can see that all the details look pretty nice, the surface looks really nice, it even has a slight shine. This thing is ready for paint. So what I do next is I wash it and make sure that it's extremely clean. You don't want to get any fingerprints on it at all. And then I used a can of air to just dust everything and make sure it was good before applying my gloss black. I soaked my gloss black into some nice hot water just to make sure that the paint got nice and milky smooth, and then I applied it. Now I'm using this Rust-Oleum engine enamel because it comes out pretty glossy, but with all the humidity that I have here, the coat did not come out as nice and smooth as I wanted, and it was not nearly as glossy as I wanted. So I ended up applying a clear coat after that. I'm using this Rust-Oleum Crystal Clear enamel, but you can use whatever clear coat you want. An automotive clear coat would be insane. You want this coat to be as clear and shiny as possible. There's a lot of ways that you can make that metallic look, but I don't have an airbrush, so I'm going to be doing a graphite rub on this thing. You can use a lot of things to apply it, like a brush, a cotton ball, a makeup pad, but I highly recommend these makeup sponges because they go on so nice and it doesn't leave any of those little cotton fibers that a cotton ball will leave. You do not want anything to mess up the perfection of this paint job. Once it's all applied, you want to take that same can of air, or if you have an air compressor, you can use that as well, and just blow all the excess dust off so that it's nice and smooth. After that, take a clean makeup pad and just buff all of that graphite powder in. I honestly probably should have just stopped there. However, I was going to try to clear coat this thing in to protect all the graphite rub, and this ended up being a mistake. I used this automotive clear coat, which I definitely recommend. I think stateside you can get the 2K clear coat gloss. You can see how it looks. It's pretty shiny, but it doesn't quite have that metallic look that I was going for when I started this thing. So I ended up testing here what it would look like if I put more graphite rub over the top of it, and ultimately I liked that look, so I ended up adding another layer of graphite rub to this entire helmet. For some reason, I thought that I would clear coat that layer, and the unthinkable happened. The clear coat orange peeled and reacted. I don't know if it's because of the humidity, oils on my hands, or brushing, but the entire clear coat basically failed. If you have this happen to you, here's how you're going to fix it. You're going to take the finest steel wool that you can possibly find, and basically steel wool the entire helmet with extra pressure and emphasis on those areas that orange peeled. After that, I applied one more layer of graphite rub, and I finally learned my lesson about the clear coat. So with this layer of graphite powder, I buffed it extra well and made lots of pressure just to get it nice and solid in there so it wouldn't be coming up, and I did not clear coat it. This is the surface we end up with. It looks really good, like that Beskar look, and I'm pretty happy with it. Now that my surface was done, I wanted to do some minor weathering on this thing. So we're just gonna add a little bit of acrylic in the corners. We're gonna goop it on nice and thick, and then we're gonna wipe it all right back off. Be really careful doing this process on this helmet because we didn't clear coat it, so this acrylic can possibly mess up all of the graphite powder underneath. Now to make the visor. So a couple of these clips are going to be a little bit out of order because I made the visor in kind of different parts and phases throughout the entire process of the rest of the helmet. Now you could go on Amazon and buy a Hobart face shield like everybody else does, but they're pretty hard to find right now and they're pretty pricey as well as being very hard and rigid and difficult to work with. So we're going to go the inexpensive route. We're going to buy some window tint on Amazon and one of these clear acrylic sheets that are nice and flexible and easy to cut. All you really have to do is fit a piece of paper on there to get your outline, trace that out, and then trace that outline onto your clear acrylic sheeting. This clear acrylic sheeting has protective film on it, so you can use your Sharpie right on there, because we're going to be taking that off anyway. Once you get it cut out, just test fit that thing in there to make sure it fits nice and that it's going to work for you. Trim it if you need to. As I said, we're going to be window tinting this thing, so I ended up using 5% window tint that I found on Amazon. I bought an entire roll and a whole bunch of these acrylic sheets. I can do several Mandalorian visors for the price of one of those Hobart face shields that everybody's buying out on Amazon. To apply our window tint, we're going to peel back the film on that piece of acrylic sheeting. Then we're going to get lots of water on it. I even mixed just a tiny bit of dish soap in the water as well to make it even more slippery. And then very carefully, trying to start from the middle, we're going to apply that window tint on there. And then of course, it's just a process of using that squeegee just to make sure that everything gets pushed on there nice and smooth. And since we have the water, we can peel it back. If there's any air bubbles, re-stick it. Again, just start from the center and work your way out. After I was done, I just used my X-Acto knife to trim all my edges, make sure that everything looked nice. I once again took this piece and I test fitted it in there just to make sure that it was going to work inside my helmet and that it was going to fit good. It has a little bit of movement, but you just got to make sure you get it in the right spot. Initially I was going to glue this thing, but that ended up being a complete disaster, so I ended up just deciding to use super strong Velcro that I got on Amazon instead. I took one side, cut it all out nice, and got it set all on the inside of the helmet, and then the other side of the Velcro on the visor piece, and then once I stuck it in there, it was there to stay. The nice part about this too is that you can adjust it if you need, or you can switch out visors with a lower window tint if you're going to be going out at night or something like that. Once that visor's in there, this project is basically done. I appreciate you guys watching this video, and I really hope you enjoyed it. Leave me a comment if you have any questions.